You are listening to the Shopify Solutions Podcast, a podcast for Shopify store owners that brings you concrete examples on how to build and grow your e-commerce brand. Your host is Scott Austin. He owns a Shopify agency called Jade Puma. In this podcast, Scott will share his e-commerce insights and best practices with you.
Hey everyone, Scott Austin here. And as you all know, the world of e-commerce and advertising in e-commerce is getting more and more challenging as time goes on. So we've done a lot of episodes recently talking to different ad experts. And I don't think you can just get one point of view on this kind of stuff. I think you want to talk to lots of different points of views and to see what works best for your brand. I have another ad expert, Andy Janitis from PPC Pitbulls, who's going to talk to us about his experience in small brands and advertising. Welcome, Andy.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about you and PPC Pitbulls so people can understand your background and expertise?
Sure. Yeah. So PPC Pitbulls, we started right before COVID. I had always been in the agency space, and I had worked with a lot of big brands, and I decided that I really enjoyed more the times where I'd gotten an opportunity to work with these smaller brands and kind of supporting, more real people who are building a product, building a business, and helping them to grow that business. So we went out, started PPC Pitbulls. For a lot of these types of brands on that smaller side, we found that the quickest way to market was paid ads. Obviously, you need organic, you need good email, you need good retention, but all of that takes a lot longer period of time. Ultimately, you really want to, if you're trying to find quick purchases, right out of the gate, that's where we found Google ads and meta ads work really well for that. So that's our focus. We come in, work with mainly small brands, especially on the e-commerce side, try to build their businesses through Google and meta ads.
Yeah, I'm like you. I focus just in small brands, and I absolutely love it because, there's a whole bunch of reasons why I love it. But one of the big ones is you're talking to the decision maker, and they don't have a whole posse of people they have to get on board with their ideas. So you just talk about something, make a decision, execute on it, and like 30 minutes later, you're doing something completely different for the brand. And I love that speed of execution that you get with small brands.
Definitely takes all the red tape out of it.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of bureaucracy. Talk to me a little bit about today's ad ecosystem. Everybody read the 4-Hour Work Week, now almost a decade and a half ago. They have all these preconceived notions of how easy it is. Just build a website and people are going to flock to it. Just throw a couple ad dollars down and cha-ching, you're making money. Tell us, how that's true or not true. And where do you see the trends going currently that e-commerce store owners need to be thinking about how the dynamics are shifting?
Yeah. So the big thing, and this has been going for a couple of years, everything is automation now. So we're looking back 10 years and honestly, even like 5 years ago, there was a lot more manual. In the Google side of the house, you'd be talking about, bidding on individual keywords. On the Meta side of the house, it would be a lot of very specific audience targeting. And these days, it's a lot more hands off. So you're going to want to have good creative. You're going to want to describe your products really well in your creative and your copy. But then at the end of the day, you're going to want to configure everything well, make sure that you are sending good signal back into the platform so that, Google or Meta knows when somebody's executing a purchase or other conversions on your website. And then at that point, you kind of get out of the way and let these ad platforms optimize based on that data that you're sending back in. So that's definitely the biggest change we've seen.
So the computers are now smarter than the people.
That's the thing. Yeah. And a lot of times too, especially with smaller brands, there's kind of a lot of times you want to get in there and get your hands dirty and tweak and say, hey, I don't want to show up on this keyword, or hey, I really want to make sure I'm only showing up in front of women aged 35 to 48 or something like that, because your brand so well, you really want to start targeting a lot of those things. And ultimately what we find time and again is when you start putting your thumb on the scales and making those tweaks yourself, typically you're not going to outperform the model. You're going to do better by taking a step back and letting the tools optimize and you got to make sure that you have everything configured right, because you can get yourself into trouble if you don't have it set up properly. But once you have that best practice base layer, that's the biggest thing you could do is lean into the automation that these platforms are really pushing these days.
That makes sense. And, because we all think we know better, but we just can't think as many variables as the computers can. So it's always funny when I see something like that's never going to work and it totally does. Like we think we know things, but we just don't know as much as we think we do sometimes.
Thing I always think about with kind of a, a manual approach, you think, hey, your ideal customer is this, take that example, woman 35 to 48, that's the person who's going to be, most the highest affinity to your brand. But that doesn't necessarily mean, because remember, when you're putting your ad out, most likely you're competing against other people who are kind of in that same space. So it might be that for your ideal customer, all your competitors are bidding on that exact same potential person. And that's going to cost your cost per click or cost per view to go really high. However, you may find that, hey, you can get a much cheaper click or a much cheaper view from, male 18 to 25. And while they're not going to be quite as high affinity for your audience, if the click or the view costs, a quarter of what that more expensive click costs, it can ultimately be the most profitable outcome there. So yeah, they're going to buy less frequently, but you're paying a ton less to get in front of them. So that's where a lot of times when you start making those decisions yourself, you kind of miss some of those nuances that the models often can optimize through.
Yeah, that's a good way to illustrate why you should just let the system do what it wants to do. Now, let's say I'm a small e-commerce brand and I make a food product, for example, and I'm not doing advertising. I've just launched. I'm starting to get traction. How do I know that I should start advertising? Are there like key indicators? And then what does that high level roadmap look like? What sort of ads should I turn on first? Like I've heard you say Google and Meta. You didn't mention any other ad platforms, and it's probably we want to stay focused. But I'd like to hear like, here's when you should start advertising, and here's the first couple steps at a high level, like these types of ads in this system, kind of roadmap.
I think the first and foremost, make sure you have your fundamentals right. So I would never advise somebody to start throwing money into ads before they have, website that's set up well, a website that's able to get conversions. And what that typically means is that you already have some purchases coming in and you have some level of a following, even if it's friends and family. I always, every once in a while we'll get a new client call and somebody will come in and say, hey, I'm about to launch my product. Let's get ads going. And it's like, we can do that, but until you've tested it out and you've kind of established that product market fit, I would, especially for small brands, if you're working with your own money, you're not, venture backed, I would really suggest get the website up, get your basic email flows set up, and make sure that you're getting a few purchases through just to test out all those basic fundamentals before you start putting money into ads. And then when you do turn to ads, number one thing is make sure that you have your technical set up, that you're tracking when somebody ultimately makes a purchase. We like to use Google Analytics for it. It's a free tool, basic. There's a lot of better, higher tier attribution tools, but they can get pricey as well. So you don't necessarily need those starting out. But yeah, you can do a lot just with Google Analytics. And then also make sure that you're sending that data properly to both Google and Meta, if those are the platforms that you're going to use to run ads. So you're sending kind of all of the data to Google Analytics as a reporting tool, but then also sending the data specifically to the ad platforms. And there's, a few different best practices there, but you got to make sure everything is automated, but it's only going to be as good as the signal that you're sending back to these platforms. So that's my number one thing. As you start to think about, you asked about kind of which platform, it differs by brand. So typically we're going to think if you have what I would consider a high intent product, so the people who are going to come and purchase your product are already in market. They're searching for a brown handbag. That's exactly what I know what I need. I'm going to, type that in and go find it, look at like the shopping carousel at the top of my Google results. For those types of products, that's where you're going to want to be on Google, because we already know that the person, is coming to purchase that particular product. It's worth it to pay a little bit more to get in front of this person who's already in market. If you have the type of product that's kind of either pioneering its own category, or it's something that, the way we describe it sometimes, like, hey, the customer doesn't even know they need it until you tell them that they need it, that's where Meta is going to perform a lot better. So both Facebook and Instagram, because people are scrolling their phones, scrolling their feeds, and you're kind of popping up in front of them. So we kind of talk about it as the difference between intent-based marketing versus interruption-based marketing. So when you're interrupting them and getting in front of them, you can kind of tell a new story or give them new information. So these kind of products that need a little more education work a little better there.
Yeah. So one of the things you'd mentioned was, making sure that your product market fit is in place. One of the things I've heard before is that the first 100 sales in your e-commerce store are harder to get than your first 1,000, because you got to figure all those things out for the first 100. And then once you do that, the next 900 are easier to do. So I'm just going to throw a stake in the ground, like get 100 sales through your store before you start doing the advertising. And then, when you start talking about the advertising, I love the distinction between the intent-based and interruption-based. And you have to think about, for your product, which one is it? Are they searching for my product, or do they not know it exists and I need to make them aware of it? Therefore, you're going to determine, do you go, and when you said the intent-based, you mentioned what I consider Google Shopping ads. Do you start with Google Shopping ads first, or PPC, or both at the same time? How would you differentiate between those two?
Yeah, these days for e-commerce, we find that those Google Shopping ads work really well because, again, you're getting in front of an intent-based audience and you already have your shopping listing right there. So it's kind of the quickest path from we know we want this product to here's a clickable link to that exact product page. So if you've got all your products already listed in Shopify, that's a great way to go about it. What's funny about that, though, is these days, most of what we do in Google Ads, especially as you're just getting started, is going to be performance max. So that's a particular campaign style that actually combines both search ads, traditional search ads, or PPC as you described there, as well as the shopping ads, as well as a couple other formats as well. So what's great about that is you go ahead and make sure that your product feed is flowing directly from Shopify into Google Ads, get all that product data in there so they can be turned into those shopping carousel ads. You're also going to give it headlines and descriptions like you normally would for a search ad. And you can also upload images and videos. And then what it's going to do is, again, optimize in kind of an automated fashion to get in front of people on different platforms. So the promise of something like a Performance Max, I don't know, to what extent it always comes through, but they'll claim that, hey, you're following a single user across the whole journey. So say they make that initial search, you can get in front of them with search ad for, handbags as a collection. And then if they've shown interest there, then the next time they search for a brown handbag, then your shopping ad pops up. And all the while you're on different websites or you're browsing YouTube, your video ads or sidebar display ads are showing up to stay top of mind with them too. So the nice thing there is, one, it's a lot simpler setup. You go in and you just kind of throw all these assets at it and let Google figure out the best way to optimize, where all these placements are happening. And then also, it's nice that they make that claim that, hey, you can follow along. It's, that omni-channel approach of touching the potential customer in numerous parts of their buying journey.
And is remarketing included in the Performance Max?
Exactly. Yep. So it's all in one. In the old days, we would run search ads with shopping ads specifically, and then layer on top of that, display ads for remarketing. Now you don't even have to do all that. You just kind of put all those assets together in Performance Max, and it'll split it up so it puts the optimal budget onto each one of those categories. And we've done a lot of tests over the past few years. We always, you don't want to rest on your laurels. You always got to be trying new things in this space. So every few months we'll try, especially for longer term brands that we've been working with for a longer period of time, and break them out in different ways. And almost I'd say like 99% of the time right now, Performance Max is outperforming. At smaller spends too. There's different things as you kind of go up the food chain, but when you're talking about anything under 20,000-30,000 a month in ad spend, that's where we find that Performance Max is probably going to be your best bet.
So when I'm setting that up, you had mentioned the shopping ads. Do you do anything beyond the Google and YouTube channel inside of Shopify to send that feed to Google, or is that good enough?
That's good enough to get started. We actually do prefer, there's a tool out there called Simprosis is the name of the tool. It's called Feed for Google Shopping. That's a very simple one that it's just a little bit more fully featured, because one of the big levers you have is to edit those product titles, product images, and kind of how that product feed gets pushed over. So we prefer that one. I think you're going to be fine either way, especially if you're just getting started out and you want to keep it simple for yourself. If you're trying to do it yourself, you can just get away with that Google YouTube for Shopping app inside of Shopify.
I find that many store owners are challenged by content or creative. What is the keyword phrase, or what's the copy they're going to put on the return for the keyword phrase? What sort of photography? What sort of video? I tell all my stores in 2025, every e-commerce brand should be doing video, and I think literally only 5% of them are. What do you think about creative? How do people create them? What are some best practices? What are the must-haves? Do you have to just get off the or get over the hump of making videos? What do you recommend there?
I think you called it out. That's the biggest thing right there, is that there's a lot of people who are afraid to get started with that. So I try not to be too prescriptive in, hey, you've got to have exactly this, exactly that. Like if you're creating videos, you're probably ahead of 95% of other brands out there, and do what feels authentic to you. I think in the marketplace today, whether it be, e-commerce stores and paid ads, or really anywhere that you're selling, authenticity is valued above all. So if you're the type of brand that is, the hot trendy thing, and you're going to have influencers out there, then sure, go that route and get influencer video made. But if that's not authentic to your brand, you could just be the founder sitting in front of a camera, just like you're looking at us here, and describe the benefits of your product, or just a shot of somebody carrying the product down the street, or user generated content if you have people who've bought the product before and you can get in touch with them and make that happen. So yeah, I try to think like, just try something first. Best case scenario is try a couple different things, and then you'll ultimately, be able to say run your ads and then see what creative is working the best, and get more of that. But the first step is just create something. It doesn't have to be polished. Just get something out there, put it up in your ads, or even in your organic social. Start to see how it performs, and then iterate, and you got to just keep trying it. There's no real formula on the front end to say what's going to work for every brand. It's different for every brand.
Yeah, I have one client, and he's just getting to advertise in the past few months and doing pretty well. And I saw one of his ads on YouTube, and I said, just give me the raw file. And then we just made 6 new versions of it, right? We did a men's voice, a woman's voice. We did, small subtitles. We did bold subtitles. We did sound effects, right? Same ad, same message. We're just doing 6 different creatives, or I think maybe even 8. And like, let's go throw this against the wall and see what sticks, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a great way to iterate. You can start with one file, if you've recorded a video, that way you don't have to do a ton. It doesn't feel like as a founder, you're stuck with like, oh, I've got to be creating 6 videos a week kind of thing. Get the one and then tweak it up in that way. Like you said, like you could do different overlays, different colors, different headings, all those types of things. So I would call that almost like, technical video processing and copy type iterations. The other thing to think about iterating on is some of the key differentiators of your product. So get one video that really calls out how easy it is to use. Get one video that really calls out the price point. Get one video that really calls out how trendy and how all your friends are going to love it, kind of thing. And then put all those up and kind of see which works. And then you can go out and create 6 more videos on that particular kind of category or differentiator.
Yeah, I want to keep going on video here, because all my clients that I talk to, like I got 1 or 2 that'll make videos, and the rest of them, like, I have to like literally, I scream at them sometimes, because they're just so resistant. And they're so, am I doing horizontal? Am I doing vertical videos? Am I doing selfie videos on the cell phone? Is someone setting up a tripod? What do I need for lighting? I hear the just get it and do it, which I totally agree with. Let's give them a little more advice so they feel a little more confidence in their just doing it. On, is it just me talking? Is it, me talking to customers? Is it customers talking? Is it me showing the production floor? All those kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's my key guiding principle is always authenticity, right? So if you're the type of business that, like you mentioned, show the production floor, if you're a family owned business, if behind the scenes makes sense for you, if the way that you make your product is important to the story of your product, go that route. Just have the founder. And to make it easy, like you mentioned, am I going to need a tripod, perfect lighting, everything? Just use an iPhone and do an iPhone selfie to start. And I think for a lot of businesses, that's the best place to start, is just the founder talking about their business, talking about why they went about and created their product, what some of the key differentiators are, what makes their product special, how it's made, and if it's made in a sustainable way, all those different types of things. A lot of times you work with founders though, and they'll say, hey, you'll be, like you said, you're kind of like pulling teeth to get videos out of them. And you find out at the core of it, it's that they don't want to be in front of the camera. They don't want to put themselves in ads. And that's okay too, if that's not what you want to do. So then go ahead and see, is there somebody else in your business that can be that front facing person? Or sometimes maybe it's just the product. We've worked with, different food companies where the founder didn't want to have their face on there. So they've got all these videos just of a really good close-up shot of the food with maybe a hand coming in and, taking a scoop of it and holding it close to the camera for a good texture shot. It's a not, satisfying answer, but it truly can be anything. and it should be something that's unique to you and that feels good to you. Honestly, even to the point we were just saying, with the biggest barrier is founders actually creating the video and getting that video out there. I would almost say, like, start with whatever you're most comfortable with, because if you're creating anything, that's going to be the thing. Maybe I always kind of tell people to go that route of like unpolished iPhone selfie. But if you find that, like, hey, for whatever reason, that just doesn't jive with the way that you think about content or the way that you feel comfortable with it, then, go pay. You can get a local photographer to come in and do a shoot with you where they're, putting together really good polished shots of your products for, you could probably get it done for less than $1,000 for a couple quick and easy shots. So I think that's the type of thing. Just get creative with it. Don't overthink it. Create a couple pieces. That's the other big thing. We talked about 6 to 8 different variations. A lot of times I think that can be overwhelming for people. Create 2 videos, 1 video, even just get something out there, and that'll, start to spur some more inspiration. You'll start to see what works, and you can go from there.
Yeah, and a couple of things there about video. Like the example I always give is Janet Jackson. If you saw her first video, she was so stiff and so awkward in it. And then 10 years later, she just exuded love to the camera in her music videos because she was not a natural in front of the camera. But she got so good at it, she looked like a natural by the end, kind of thing. And everybody can get that level of comfort. It's just one of those, just do it, just do it, just do it. Nike's totally got it right there. And the other thing is, with video, it's so much more forgiving than text or photos, right? In text, if you have a spelling or grammar error, it sticks out like a sore thumb. In photos, if there's a finger coming in out of the corner or something that's not supposed to be there, it sticks out like a sore thumb. Because video has multiple signals of the visual, the moving visual, and the audio, it's completely forgiving of mistakes. Like, you can stutter and say in a video and it's not a big deal, but saying in your copy would be horrendous, kind of thing. So because of the multimedia functionality of video, it's way more forgiving of mistakes.
Exactly. It's very easy to chop up too. So I always, say, hey, you can easily record 20 minutes of raw video and you can hand that off to somebody on Upwork, and they'll, you could probably get 10 good clips out of that can be used for different ads, different variation. So, don't even worry about it. If you make a mistake, hey, I got to stop the recording and start all over and just keep trying it type thing. Just let it all run and just get a bunch of raw video. And then there's a ton of people who, for very cheap, can go ahead and edit it all up for you. Or if you're the type of person who likes doing that, we use Descript a lot for that, which does a great job of, cutting out the ums and uhs and, putting in CCs for you. What do you call that? Closed captions for you to get on your ads. So that's a great tool as well.
So we're encouraging our store owners to create some videos. And it sounds like a lot of it is what I think it should be. It's like a spokesperson talking about the product kind of thing is the best way to get started in video. Let's shift now to photography. And what should their photography look like that they're throwing up for these ads?
Yeah. So the first thing is start with your product photographs, right? So just, as before you even get to ads, you're going to want to make sure that you have good layouts on the site. And you can do a lot of different lifestyle and different styles if you want to have that on your site. But if you're going to do that, make sure you also have just the pure product on a solid, usually white background as well. So that's one of the biggest things, is just making sure you have good, high quality images of the product on a white background, because that's ultimately where we're going to feed back into Google Ads or Meta Ads as your shopping carousel. And that's what we find to be the most impactful for Shopify stores getting started. From there, you can go and start to add some lifestyle shots. So things like, somebody using your product, if it's, food or beverage, people laughing, joking, eating and drinking or sharing with friends, all those types of things, really just put it in the environment that you would have your ideal customer actually using your product. And then the last thing we can do is actually putting in some overlays with, text actually on the image with, pointing out some of the key features. You can even go as far as to have, arrows pointing to different areas of the product for different features. I would say for new stores starting out, that's probably the most overwhelming to kind of get to that professional level. So don't let that stop you. Make sure that you start with, similar to how we just talked about it with video, the more iterations you have to test, the better off you're going to be. but definitely make sure you have good, clean layouts with just the product on a white background. And then from there, kind of start to scale up and try a bunch of different things.
Yeah, and you mentioned the infographics, which I'm a huge fan of, and what really surprises me is I'll have clients, and on their Shopify store they'll have no infographics, and then I look at their product on Amazon, and it's full of them. Like they
Yeah,
pick up the best practice over there on Amazon, but they don't bring it back to their Shopify store. But those are great assets once you create those for Amazon or your Shopify store to reuse inside of your ads also.
exactly. You might as well use that in the store and on your ads.
So now I want to get into the little bit of the technical hassles that I see with Google so people understand. Like one of the things I find myself explaining to a lot of clients because they're small teams, they don't get the feedback from other people with their team is, yes, this is actually that hard, right? And what I mean by that, so I'm going to walk through a couple things that I think they need to do, the steps to get this all working. And you tell me if I'm right or wrong about those so that the audience can go, oh, I do have to do 14 different steps to get all this working kind of stuff just from connecting the system. So you've got your Shopify store, you add your Google and YouTube channel to it, you create a Google Analytics account, connect that to your Google and YouTube channel, you create a Google Merchant account, which by the way is a separate account setup process than Google Analytics, as nutty as that sounds, and then you connect that to your Google and YouTube channel. You create a Google Ads account, which once again, as nutty as it sounds, is different from your Google Merchant and your Google Analytics account. And then you connect your Google Merchant to your Google Analytics and to your Google Shopping. Is that accurate?
That about covers it. So you have, your three key accounts there. You're going to have Google Analytics. That's going to be a lot of reporting and where you're going to get your analytics. Your Google Merchant Center, where that's going to be where all your product data lives, so that you're able to run promos, edit product titles, change how you want products to show up. And then to run the ads, you're actually going to have a separate Google Ads account. All that product data has to flow from Merchant Center over to the Google Ads account. And then when behaviors occur on the site, you're going to need from the site signals to go both to Google Ads as well as Google Analytics. So yeah, there's a lot of, I'd say like there's a lot of simplicity. We talked earlier about how there's a lot of automation happening. So a lot of it can be kind of set it and forget it. And it's not as manual in the ad account anymore. But as you just kind of illustrated, there's a lot of separate moving parts and you just got to get it right the first time. So there's a lot of fundamentals to get right as you kind of go through the full setup.
Yeah, and that's always fun for me with clients is like when we do all that, the only way I can get that to work for them is we get on one of these calls, sharing a screen and like type this in, do this, give me access to it. Like it's such a pain, but once you get it set up, it's really nice. So now I want to go run my first Performance Max campaign or set up my first Performance Max campaign. I go to Google Ads to do that. What are the steps that I have to walk through to get that what are the must-haves that the store owners need to think about to make sure they've got their initial thing running properly?
Yep. So on the Google Ads side, it's the nice thing is there's going to be a wizard. So you're going to go to your campaign tab. There's a big blue plus button, create a new campaign, and it'll kind of walk you through. So as far as doing it is simple. You could walk through that kind of wizard. Anybody could probably get started on that and ultimately, hopefully, kind of get to the end and have some ads running. There's a few key gotchas in there though that you really gotta be aware of. So first and foremost, again, I keep coming back to making sure signals are flowing back to Google Ads, and in Google Ads land, that's called conversion. So you're going to need to go in. There's a separate tab for it called conversions. Make sure that you're tracking at a minimum purchase, but usually we like to track purchase, begin checkout, and add to cart so that you have the data points for each one of those. You're also going to want to make sure that data is correct. So before you really start throwing a lot of money into it, you'll want to just kind of make sure that your numbers from Google Analytics to Google Ads to Shopify all kind of line up properly. So to me, that's always the biggest thing, is making sure that your data is coming in and flowing properly and is relatively correct. From there, you're going to kind of continue to follow that Performance Max setup wizard. It's going to ask you to provide videos, going to ask you to provide images, headlines, descriptions, and that Merchant Center product feed is going to be pulled over as well. A couple of the gotchas there. Make sure you use all the different image and video layouts that it gives you. So typically you're going to have the option to do both horizontal and vertical videos and images, as well as square. So you want to make sure that you have something that fits into each one of those. If you don't, Google will automatically edit some of those images and videos. And especially if you have something like we were talking about, like the image, infographic images, some of those cuts aren't always how you want it. So if you can, make sure that you actually get edited layouts for the correct proportions for each one of those images, videos. Put in a varied number of headlines and descriptions. So try, don't just have them all say the same thing over and over. Always start with, your store name, your product name, but then, run through a few that are, the absolute best, whatever your product is. Have a few that are key differentiators. So, people love it because it's cheapest, or people love it because it's, sustainably made, or it's the only, protein bar specifically made for CrossFit athletes, or whatever it is. Make sure you're calling all of that information out. You only have limited characters, and it'll guide you if you go over character counts and all of that. So make sure that you're including all of the key components that illustrate, what makes your brand your brand. And then finally, think through location targeting. That's always something that I feel like kind of gets overlooked. You can easily go in and just make it US only, but if your product appeals specifically to a different geography, make sure you get that set up. If you don't take orders outside of the US, make sure you set it up not only to US targeting, but there's a special little kind of gotcha setting that's presence in. So making sure that you're only advertising to people in America, not people who have presence or interest in, which oftentimes can be international as well. So those are just kind of a couple of the little gotchas to illustrate. But yeah, there's a lot of little like configuration points in there that you got to make sure you get right. But ultimately, you're just going to follow through the wizard and, kind of answer the questions to the best of your ability.
Excellent. I want to go through that same conversation, which is quite lengthy, but probably a shorter version of it on the meta side of things. How easy is it to get set up for those people who, just to remind people, those are for the interruption-based ads. If your product isn't something that people are searching for, you have to let them know you exist. Like you have a brand new, like I have a client, they're named Pom Bell. They're going to be launching here in a couple months, and they have a cowbell pom pom cheer your sports team on product, completely new, right? So they can't go and do the keyword one, but they can go to the interruption side of things. So how does a brand that decides they want to start with the interruption side, how do they get started with Meta?
Yeah, so that's where video is going to be especially important because it's easy. It's a lot cheaper to get a video in front of somebody than it is an image, or especially like an actual product listing image. So the way that we like to think about it on Meta is kind of a funnel based approach. So we think of it at the top of the funnel is, and you kind of think of these as like two separate campaigns. So like top and middle of the funnel is where you're building engagement, teaching people about your brand, and hopefully getting people to kind of raise their hand and say, hey, this is something that interests me. And the way that they can show that they're interested would either be clicks, so not making any purchase or anything, but just traffic to the site, or just engaging with the ad itself. So with video ads, you can go, you can run video ads that are actually optimized to get more people who are going to watch the video start to finish, and that kind of show their engagement in that way, or liking your page, your community, whatever it is that means engagement with your brand to you. So that's what we like to do at the top of the funnel. And then bottom of the funnel is going to be almost getting closer to that intent-based marketing, where you've got much clearer call to action, come and buy this particular product, as well as the Meta calls it catalog ads, where it's going to be your actual product listing itself. Click on it, come and buy it. And what you're going to do is basically set up that engagement campaign, and that's going to go out there, get you a lot of cheap eyeballs, and let people kind of raise their hands and show that they're engaged. And then in that bottom of the funnel, you're going to be showing up in front of people who've already engaged with the top of the funnel. So at a high level, that's the structure we like to pick out. From a technical component, honestly, it's a lot of the same stuff that we talked about with Google. It's making sure that your signal is set up. There is a Shopify app that will directly put your conversion actions directly over into Meta. It'll also push your product data directly over into Meta. That's so. Some of that stuff works pretty well through the out-of-the-box app. If you're just getting started, that's a fine place to start. Over time, you're going to want to think about what's called server-side tracking. It's a little bit more complex technical setup. So make sure that you get that technical setup done properly. And then similar to I mentioned in Google, it's all just a wizard. It's going to say, hey, there's a button to create new campaign. It'll walk you through, the different decisions you need to make for the campaign level. then the decisions you need to make for the ad set level, and ultimately for the ad itself. And you can kind of go through and follow along the wizard.
Now, in Meta, is it sort of like in Google where you have a performance max and you're not telling it where to put things, and Meta's just being smart about it? And is it putting it in Facebook and Instagram and other channels on its own?
Exactly. Yeah. Meta's moving more and more in that direction. It's probably a little bit behind Google in terms of still having some more of the manual components. So there's more, I would say there's more decisions to be made on the Meta side. There's more campaign configurations that we would consider and do differently for different businesses. Not as much as on the Google side. It truly is almost always performance max is the campaign you want. On the Meta side, they use Advantage Plus as kind of a overarching umbrella that covers a lot of the same stuff that's going on in Google's performance max. But what Advantage Plus essentially is hey, you're not going to be picking out individual placements. You're not going to be picking out an individual audience. Instead, you're going to be giving Meta a suggestion of who you think the audience might be or what placements you think they might be. And then ultimately, to your point of platform, you're going to be providing it images and headlines, descriptions, just like you would on Google side. And then it's going to go ahead and spread those out over Instagram, and even inside of Instagram versus Facebook, stories versus reels versus feeds, put placements on all those different things, and then optimize for, where the audience is engaging the most.
But in this world, it's video, video, video.
It is a lot of video. What's funny? I talked about that kind of top tier, bottom tier. Video is all top tier. But what we find is interesting is oftentimes video is going to get placed into your reels or stories on the Facebook side. And people aren't necessarily clicking off of that because they're just kind of, doom scrolling, for lack of a better term. So video does really well for building that engagement, that education, getting in front of somebody. But then when you get to that bottom of funnel where you actually want somebody to take action, click off, come to your website, that's where static images and even kind of text-based ads are going to really perform well.
Building trust in your store is essential, but let's be honest. Most trust badge apps make your store look worse, not better. Their badges clash with your brand and give your store a Frankenstein-like feel. That's why we built Badgezilla, the Shopify app that delivers trust badges that seamlessly match your brand. Originally crafted for our private clients, Badgezilla was so successful we turned it into an app for every Shopify store. With Badgezilla, you'll access hundreds of badges, all customizable to your brand guidelines, making them a natural part of your customer experience. Place badges on product pages, collection pages, the home page, and more. Take it a step further with conditional logic. Show a Made in Canada badge only on products made in Canada, or tailor badges to highlight your unique selling points. And the best part, Badgezilla comes with a robust, always free plan so you can start building trust risk-free. Transform trust into conversions with Badgezilla.
We talked a lot about, the really small brands getting started. These small brands, I bet, have heard a lot of best practices from the big brands. What are the things they shouldn't be doing that they've heard about that are successful for big brands that they're not big enough for yet and they don't have to worry about?
Exactly. I think it's probably going to follow a lot of the same themes we've been talking about this entire conversation. But as a small brand, I always kind of give a suggestion of keep it simple, right? You don't need a million different pieces of creative. You don't need a million different campaigns that are all segmented differently. And that's where I think people oftentimes get in trouble, where they hear about bigger brands and say, hey, I'm putting out 30, 50, 80 pieces of creative per month. I'm testing all these different ideal customer personas, all the different places, and I'm running individual ads set to each one of those different segments. I've seen courses that make the case for, hey, you're going to be defining 7 or 8 different customer personas, and then inside of each one, 3 or 4 different differentiators that matter to those 7 or 8 personas. So you end up with like 21 different combinations, and they're looking for different creative and different campaigns for each one. And what can really break for small businesses, kind of 2 big things. One, first of all, that's overwhelming. So oftentimes you just don't do it at all. You just get broken halfway through and stop, which obviously is not the goal. But then the other, from a technical perspective, because we said that everything is this automated approach and the thing that matters the most is the signal that you're sending back, you can always think to yourself, if you're running a limited budget and you run one campaign and get 30 purchases, you've sent 30 pieces of data back to that one campaign. But now if we segment that out and create 7 different campaigns, each with a slightly different angle, those 30 purchases for the same budget now have to get split 7 ways. And each campaign only has, 3 to 5 different data points to actually read into and optimize on. So oftentimes we say, hey, consolidate, simplify. And what you're going to be doing really is consolidating the signal that gets sent back to Google or Meta into that one campaign and letting it have as much data as possible instead of taking your limited budget, breaking it up that many different ways, and then never really getting a chance to test any given angle fully. And that can actually happen with product catalogs a lot too. If you're the type of business that has a 20,000 SKUs in your product database, maybe start with just one specific category and run your limited budget just advertising one of your best selling categories, as opposed to trying to give it the entire catalog, letting it go out there and run all these different tests, and ultimately no one product or no one SKU ever gets more than a couple clicks, much less a purchase. And it makes it a lot harder to optimize.
Now, if I'm getting started running some ads, how should I be measuring the effectiveness of that ad? What kind of metrics should I be looking at, and where am I going to find those metrics?
Yeah, so some of the key metrics are going to be ROAS, return on ad spend, as well as new customer acquisition cost. So basically, for each new purchaser who came in, how much did you spend in ad spend? And we like to look at these numbers actually at the site-wide level. So it's great if you can break it down and attribute it, and you should be trying to attribute it to, hey, only the purchases that came from Google and only the purchases that came from Meta. But there's a lot of challenges, a lot of technical challenges to getting that attribution just perfect. So on top of that, you also need to make sure that you're looking at it from a site-wide level and say, hey, here's my total ad spend that I put out there. And then ROAS is essentially revenue divided by that total ad spend. So your total site-wide revenue divided by the ad spend you put in, as well as new customer acquisition costs, are going to be the total number of new customers. So new emails that made a purchase in a given month or whatever your time frame, divided by the total ad spend over those timeframes. So those are some of the key fundamentals, but they can cover up a lot of problems as well. So we actually, we focus on, we've got a group of 4, what we call our paid ads reality checklist. And these are some metrics that we run for every one of our clients every single quarter. And some of the key things that you're looking at are your first order profitability. So this is not only, hey, what's the revenue you got over your ad spend, but let's also take into account the cost of your typical product. And oftentimes these smaller brands have to average it out a little bit. You might not have those numbers perfectly, but taking into account how much profit are you actually making per purchase, not just your ROAS or your new customer acquisition, and then your customer lifetime value and how that grows over the first year. So again, you're not just focusing on how much did it cost to get that customer, but you're making sure that you're actually growing the value of the customer over a period of time. Those can get a little bit more complex to calculate and track, obviously, but they can also be a lot more telling in terms of, should you be making changes to the ads? Should you be making changes to your email and retention plan? Should you be making changes to your landing pages, your collection pages to make them more conversion friendly? All those different things will show up in the numbers differently. But yeah, definitely at a minimum, as soon as you start running ads, you've got to have ROAS and new customer acquisition costs, both at the platform. So Google Ads, specific ROAS, Meta Ads, specific ROAS, as well as site-wide, looking at, what are your trends over time in new customer acquisition cost and ROAS from a site-wide level.
So when you say site-wide, does that mean we're looking at Google Analytics?
We kind of like to combine the 2 different data sources. So yeah, typically GA4 is an easy place to look for those numbers, but we actually like to use more than anything your actual backend numbers. So looking at the Shopify numbers when you start talking about site-wide, because GA4 is still going to have some of those same attribution problems that the platforms have, a little less so because it's counting one purchase gets assigned to one individual channel. So at least there's not double counting. That Google Ads and Meta Ads aren't both taking credit for the same purchase, but it still isn't going to necessarily count every purchase perfectly because some people might have ad blockers in their browser or different things going on like that. So when we look at site-wide numbers, we typically start at the source of truth or kind of the Shopify level. And that's why we like to look at the site-wide numbers there, because you can't fake those numbers. There's no arguing that, hey, this much revenue actually hit your bank account, or hey, this many new accounts actually made purchases in the last month, and here's the exact amount of dollars that I put into ad spend. That takes away some of that quibbling about, was it really a Google Ads purchase or a Meta Ads purchase? It's just that high level, real ground truth, actual numbers. How are we doing, by the books?
So you're at that site-wide level, you're taking all your new customers, the total dollars you've made from them, and dividing it by the total amount of marketing dollars you put towards your campaigns, regardless of which platform they were on.
Exactly. And for new customer acquisition, it's just the count of new customers, not even the revenue from them. It's, how much are you paying per each new customer you got in the door.
When I'm doing all of this and I'm setting up my campaigns, what kind of ROAS should I be getting when I start? And I know it's going to differ for everybody. I'm just looking for general guidelines. Like, the big one is, are you going to be losing money when you start, and setting that expectation for people? How long, are you going to be losing money if that is the case? And then, what sort of improvements are you going to be able to see in the first 3 to 6 months as you get better with this system, put more content to it, the system gets smarter, and those kind of things?
A lot of ground to cover there. And I'll always put that big caveat. You called it out. It's different for every single business. At the end of the day, my big point of view is you've got to be profitable. So I think over the years, and this kind of gets back to one of those, like, what big business practices, there's a lot of these venture-backed firms out there that had this concept that, hey, you can go and acquire a bunch of customers at a loss and it'll work out okay because you're, gaining market share. For most of the what I would call small business, or most of the kind of founder-driven brands that we work with, that's not really acceptable because you're funding it yourself. You really can't lose money for very long at all, if at all. So my big thing is to make sure you're profitable first. So when we think about a metric like ROAS, so again, that's revenue divided by the ad cost that it costs you to get it. It's going to be different based on what your margins are, but you want to be honest with yourself about what you really actually need to be profitable. And there's a lot of different calculations that go into that, but at a very high level, you can think about it like, hey, if your margin costs and your landed margin costs, so the cost not only for the product, but to ship it to the warehouse, to get it shipped from the warehouse to the customer, for any storage that you're paying at the warehouse, taxes, anything like that, returns. What are your actual true costs per product? And when you start thinking about that in terms of a margin, say that's 50% margin, that's going to tell you that, hey, for every purchase that, or for every sale you make, your actual profit from that sale is going to be essentially 50% of the revenue. So from a ROAS perspective, we would say, hey, you can break even if you're getting a 2x ROAS on that. Obviously, you don't want to just break even. You probably want to do a little bit better than that so that you're keeping some profit. But you can put in as many dollars to get the sale, or about 50% of the cost of the product in order to get that sale, because that's the amount of margin that you have there. So that to me would be your absolute baseline minimum. Let's not go below 2x, because if you go below 2x, you're really actually losing money every purchase you make. And it might look great that, hey, you got a bunch of revenue, but you're losing money. And now, as I'm giving that example, I'm sure there's a lot of store owners cringing out there and go, hey, I'm dying if I get 2x. I really need closer to 3x, 4x, 5x. And what I'll say is, one, be honest with yourself. Make sure that if you need a 5x return on your ad spend in order to make your margins work, understand that. So, first and foremost, don't lose money. Second of all, you've got to know that if you set your goal to be a 5x return, you may be able to get it, but it's not going to scale quite as far. So a lot of times, we have this conversation with brand new clients. We say, hey, what is a ROAS target? Where are we shooting for? And they'll say, oh, as high as possible. I want a 10x ROAS. And that's fine. And sometimes you can even achieve that at very low ad spends for particular clients. But the downside is, the lower your ad spend, think about it like you're only putting ad dollars into your exact ideal customer profile. So those first $50, $100 in ad spend you put out there, it's going to be going to the people who are most likely to buy your product and who are going to give you the lowest cost of acquisition and the highest ROAS possible. Then as you try to ramp up that ad spend, you're getting to kind of bigger and bigger concentric circles where you're going to people who are less and less likely to purchase your product, and it gets more expensive. So that's going to drop down your average ROAS and your average cost per acquisition. So that's where we say there's typically kind of a balance where the more you spend in ads, the more your ROAS is going to start to fall down, all other things being equal. They're kind of inversely proportional. So you want to go ahead and come up with, first of all, what's your break-even ROAS? What's the level that, hey, I can't make less than this, or I'm going to be actually losing money? And then throw a little bit of a profit margin on that. And what we find is, if it works for your numbers, the best brands that are able to kind of get the most out of scaling and starting to grow in these channels are typically looking for like a 3x, maybe 3.5x ROAS. If you start getting much higher than that, you can probably get some results at low ad spends, but you're not going to be able to scale it very far.
Now, when I get started on this, how long does it take for the system to have enough data that it's run through, that it's running at its steady state? Is there like a warm-up period?
Yeah, it's a little bit different for Google and Meta. Google, we typically like to look for, a month to 2 months. Meta goes a little bit faster. So typically within that first month, you're going to have an idea of how that particular ad is going to perform. And then I like to tell people, a lot of times we hear these horror stories where people will come to us and say, hey, let's, audit my ad accounts. And I just spent 15K over 5 months. I was spending, 3K a month or something, and I never really got any purchases for it. And I always kind of, it's a little bit of a head scratcher because it's like, well, by the time you hit month 3, why are you still putting more money into it at that level, knowing you're not getting any results? And a lot of times I think there's kind of less scrupulous agencies out there that'll tell you, hey, it takes that long. It takes that amount of money to spend to get the results in. And you're not always going to be profitable necessarily in the first 2 to 3 months. But what I always like to tell people is you should absolutely see some good trending signs up. So, some of those key metrics we talked about, even if you don't hit that profitability mark in the first 3 months, you better see improvement in those metrics in the first 3 months. If you run 5 months and you haven't even gotten your first purchase, you got to rethink some things. And maybe that gets back to the product market fit and make sure that you have some actual purchases coming into your site. Make sure that, your site is set up well and is conversion ready. But yeah, I like to tell people that like by the end of month 1 or 2, depending on whether you're Google or Meta, you should have a pretty good idea of whether or not you're currently profitable, or at a minimum, you should have some good trend lines that are going to show, hey, are we going to be able to get this to profitability, or is this kind of a fool's errand until we fix some of those other fundamentals in our business?
And what sort of spending strategy should, we have? Should we start at X dollars per day, per month? And then when do we start ramping it up?
So again, it's a little bit different. You can spend, I would say you could start out a little bit lower on the Meta side, a little bit higher on the Google side. But I typically would say don't go too much lower than about 1,500 per month, typically. If you start getting much below that, you're just not getting enough data, enough clicks, enough views. That's a really broad generalization because it's going to be very different for every single business. Typically when people are looking for just like a line in the sand, I would say, if you don't have 1,500 to spend on ads in the first month, maybe hold off. I wouldn't get started with like $10 a day or something like that, just to go with. That being said, on the high end, again, you don't need to spend 5K, 10K before you start getting results. You can get started even for brands that come to us with a much larger budget. I like getting started in that smaller range, say 1,500 to 2,000 a month, and test it out and get it profitable first, and then start thinking about scaling it up and how, where you can take it from there. So that's kind of where I would go. There's a more complex calculation you can think through of, hey, if I told you want to get 30 purchases coming back into the equation to let these models optimize, and we're talking about a ROAS of 3x or 2x, whatever your kind of target ROAS is, you can start to kind of back out the math and say, hey, what's your average order value multiplied by this particular ROAS? And I'm trying to get 30 of those purchases. So how much is it going to cost me to get that amount? But for a lot of different brands, it's going to end up coming out in that 1,000 to 1,500 range to get started.
So we've been talking about Google, we've been talking about Meta, and let's say that I'm a real hip, trendy person, and I know it's all about TikTok today, and TikTok's got this beautiful store shop thing going on, and that's where I'm going to start because I'm cutting edge. What do you say to that store owner?
I would say if you are the type of person, it always kind of comes back to authenticity. If you are like a Gen Zer, you love to be on your phone, you love to be creating new content all the time, and you're very founder in front of the camera kind of focused, you may actually find the most success on TikTok. Most people we work with, that's not their brand positioning. So I would say, for 99% or 95% of brands, if you're starting out small with a very limited budget, focus on the biggest players first and optimize them first. Again, keep it simple. Don't even probably split it between Google and Meta. Pick the one that's going to be most likely to give you success and start there and figure, put all your eggs into that basket, see if you can get it profitable. If you can't, go ahead and try the other platform at that point. But the market is still dominated by Google and Meta. So go ahead and get the most that you can out of those two platforms first, and then start thinking about some of these exterior platforms. TikTok is up and coming quickly, and is quickly kind of trying to encroach into that and make it a top 3 instead of a top 2. But certainly things like, I hear about people who say, oh man, I got to be advertising on Pinterest, or I got to be advertising on X or something. It's like, well, you can, and certainly once you get to a certain level, that might be the right place for your brand to go to get that next incremental growth. But until you've really maximized what you're going to get out of Google and Meta, I think that's the place to start.
For small brands, when is this a DIY type of effort? And when is this something that you hire an external expert to manage for you?
It comes down to, one, I guess, kind of your skill set and kind of, how marketing and technically savvy are you? And two, what's your interest in learning and taking the time to kind of figure this all out? I think we kind of illustrated throughout this conversation, there is a lot of simplicity to a lot of these things, but there's a lot of gotchas. So it's simple, but it's not easy kind of thing. Both platforms, what's funny is they've made themselves very easy for anybody to go in and create a campaign. It's, simple wizard, you hit plus and you can go ahead and start creating your campaign. But like I keep coming back to, the most important thing is making sure that you're technically pushing your signal back to the platform before you start running your ads. That gets a little bit more complex. Shopify can make it easy because there's, a plugin for Google and there's a plugin for Meta. Sometimes that doesn't always work. So make sure that you're at a minimum able to understand what you're doing when you use one of those apps, and understand how to test it and ensure that once it is all set up, it's actually set up properly and you see the signal flowing properly. And then inside the ad campaign itself, you can buy, courses out there. There's pretty simple courses for, how to set up e-commerce ads in Google Ads, how to set up e-commerce ads in Meta Ads. And honestly, I think you could probably be successful if you want to get started and really learn how to do it. But I would say what you absolutely should not do is just go onto one of these platforms, go ahead and set up the ad and, just use all the defaults that they propose. I had a great example of a client that we were working with for some period of time. We got everything set up kind of according to best practices. And over time they say, hey, this looks pretty simple. Let's go ahead and we want to take it in house. And they did that. What happens is every so often Google will give you a call about once a quarter and say, hey, I'm a free Google Ads advice. Somebody will, a support person will pop up on a call with you. And almost 100% of their suggestions are increase your budget and turn on automated suggestions that will allow certain things to change in your account without you even knowing about it. So this client did that and ultimately came back to us, a month or two later and say, hey, this great ROAS that we had, I made a couple of changes and now all of a sudden it tanked. And what's going on here? And the answer is there's a lot of very easy things you can do, a lot of very easy changes you can make, but some of it's a little bit counterintuitive, and there's just gotchas out there, is, for lack of a better term. So make sure that if you're going to do it, you're going to take the time to, take a quick course, figure out what you're going to try to do, and, really learn why you're making all of these different, configuration decisions, and not just, kind of following along the defaults that the wizard tells you, or especially, when Google or Meta support calls and says, hey, for this campaign, we think you'll do better if you increase your budget. It's like, yeah, well, sure. Or my favorite suggestion, oftentimes they'll say, hey, this campaign will get more conversions if you set your target ROAS lower. It's like, well, sure. But there's a reason it was set that way, because that's the only way I'm profitable is at that given target. So you got to be careful if you're going to do it yourself. And I would say, maybe budget a month or two of real good study and learning time. If you're going to, and probably, at least, a few hours a week for maintenance and checking in on the account and all of that, if you're going to try to take it on yourself.
Yeah. And, kind of related, but kind of tangential. One of my best practices is never engage someone who reaches out to you for buying from them. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
In any way, shape, or form. If you're coming to me, I'm not talking to you. Right.
Yeah. I mean, at a minimum, from a fraud perspective, make sure that it's, actually somebody who's actually with the platform. But even at that, the people who are reaching out on behalf of the platforms, even if it's no fraud involved, are oftentimes they're just looking to get you to spend more money on the platforms.
Yeah, their goals are not aligned with yours, which is true in many situations, right? So as we say that, right, how do I go find an agency to help me out? What should I be looking at?
You're going to want to go out. There's a million paid ads agencies out there. Oftentimes we're here talking on a podcast. It can help to either find somebody in a different channel rather than just say, hey, Google for, paid ads agency. Find somebody in a podcast that you trust. Find somebody, that you have some relationship. word of mouth works really well. Talk to another business owner that who's used a particular agency. That's always kind of a good first step, is like, make sure that one, you have some level of reference, even if it's just having heard this person speak before. And one big thing that I kind of big takeaway I like to say is, like, every single agency should be able to explain everything that they're doing in such a way that you understand it, you understand why each decision is being made, and you understand where your ad dollars are going. So if you're going to be paying somebody to manage your ad spend and they're throwing a bunch at you and saying, hey, we've got to do this, and you don't quite get it, they're not making a compelling case, that's probably a big red flag. So I would say first, start from word of mouth, a podcast that you've heard, somebody that you've heard talk at a conference. Get somebody that you feel like you can trust, and then listen to your gut as you're going through. They should be explaining to you each step of the way why they're making each different decision, why they're asking you to spend a little bit more on this campaign or a little less. Or sometimes you're going to bring them an idea and say, hey, I know we've been running with this particular creative angle. Why don't we try this? And be ready for the answer. Might be no. It might be the, hey, you got to trust the expertise of your agency. There's a reason why you're working with them as an agency. But if the answer is no and you don't get it, like if they can't put into words why that they don't want to take your suggestion, that's definitely a big red flag and something I would make sure to turn around.
Yeah, if somebody's listening to you talk right now, like, hey, I want to talk to a little more to this Andy guy, how can they reach out to you?
So you can come find us. We'll have a special link just for listeners of this particular podcast. Come to ppcpitbulls.com/Shopify, and that'll bring you to a welcome page where you'll see a recording of this specific podcast, as well as a few different links. One of them is to get in touch with me. The other one, earlier in this conversation, I referenced the paid ads reality checklist. That'll give you a step-by-step of some specific analytics you can pull. If you're already running ads and you're just not quite sure why it's not working, why it's not scaling, that's a great resource, free resource. You can go in and it'll show you exactly where to go in Shopify and GA4 to pick out the metrics and figure out kind of what your next best step is.
I love how in the way the internet works today, you and I do this all the time, right? We give out lots of free information and just everybody gets to benefit from that. It's amazing how much you can learn through these free resources.
Exactly. I always love that. And, that's my favorite part of the day, honestly, is popping on these free 30-minute strategy sessions with new businesses, because part of the reason why, like we were talking about earlier, why I appreciate, and it sounds like you appreciate, working with smaller businesses is that everybody's a character. It's amazing how you get on one of these conversations and you hear about this product or this business that like you would never have even known existed. So for me, I love having those conversations, and I always say, like, you're not bothering me, even if you're just kicking the tires and you've got a kind of question that you want answered, and you're not ever really even planning on moving forward with ad services. I love just starting these conversations with new business owners. So I'd really encourage anybody, if you'd like to, reach out, and I'd love to hear from you.
That's awesome. And I totally agree. It's so much fun talking to all these different people. We covered a ton. Thank you for all that. Is there any last piece of advice that you haven't told this audience that they should know?
No, I think it's probably all included in there, but top things is keep it simple and make sure that you're measuring good conversions and where your ad dollars are going and whether or not they're being successful. I think if you start out with that as your guiding star, you're probably going to make some better decisions along the way.
Thanks for your time today, Andy. This was awesome.
Thank you, Scott. It's been great.
You've been listening to the Shopify Solutions podcast with Scott Austin. This podcast is brought to you by Jade Puma, a Shopify-focused agency located in San Diego, California. If you like what you heard, please leave a review and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to work with Scott on your brand, email him at scott@jadepuma.com.